Hey, Julian, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me
Oh,
okay?
yep. Okay. It was just a little unnervingly quiet there.
It
So
was there. I was trying to,
it's
there's
working.
several places here to, unmute yourself and have to
Yeah.
experiment. Did
Okay.
you go to their powwow up there a few weeks ago in Columbus?
Oh, hang on just a second. I have to fix something here.
Sure.
Takes me a minute to get all the YouTubes and Zooms working correctly here.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. Right. Hi, John. I'm sorry. Did somebody ask a question?
Oh, it was me. Did you go to the powwow a few weeks ago up in Columbus?
No, no. It's a I don't know what a 20 or a 24-hour round trip ride for me. I can't go there for a swap meet. I got no room for anything anyway.
I know the feeling. I was going up there to see if I could sell stuff, but the reason I didn't go is that man, every day was beautiful except that day. They were predicting rain from 7 in the morning to 12 noon, and that's the prime time of it. And it's an outdoor event, and if it's thunderstorms as they predicted,
Yep.
I thought I better pass it. Anybody else know on this? Did it rain up there that morning that went?
A lot of people went, so maybe we'll have somebody on the meeting that went.
And I'm
Is
just
it?
real curious. What did I miss up there?
Mm.
I'm sure. I'm sure it was bright and sunny with my luck, bright and sunny, and I missed everything, good deals and stuff, and could have peddled off some stuff there, which I desperately need to do. In fact, I'm getting ready to get another stash or a hoard of image orthicon, some Mechanoscope tubes, and some other tubes and stuff. And as if I don't have enough already, but I have to rescue them.
I got to see some IOs at one of the strangest of places back in August. I was at the last great electronic surplus store, Apex Surplus in Burbank.
Wow, I bet they had a bunch coming from that neighborhood.
You name it, they had it.
Did you get them all?
No, a lot of them were marked prop rental only.
Well, what would the difference? They wouldn't let them go or sell them or what?
That's right.
Prop rental only. Like you need an image orthicon as a prop. Usually it's not the tube itself, it's the whole camera. I'm sure that would have made the movie there, like in one of those detective movies. We have this image orthicon that was used in a robbery here, held up a bank with this image orthicon.
We used to do a Halloween thing, a haunted house, and it was there was old weird old tubes always make nice set dressing for Frankenstein labs and things like that.
Mm. I used to live in Seattle, Washington, and up in Seattle on Cairo television, they had J.P. Patches, a clown show. And one of his shows, I can't remember, um, was some kind of a machine, like a time machine, or it was something. It was just a big cardboard thing. But out of the top of it, it had two IO tubes sticking out of it. Just I guess that's all the props they had there back in the early 60s.
I'll
So
have
they
to ask
used,
the pastor at church tomorrow about that because he grew up in Seattle watching Cairo.
oh, ask him about JP Patches. I was
JP Patchard.
JP Patches. He was a clown
Okay.
up there, and he was very talented. He never had a script for any of his daily shows. In fact, when I was like 11 years old, my mother walked with me up to Cairo up there, and I was one of the Patches pals on the cartoon show at the very end. And he would hand out Wonder Bread and some other bakery products that sponsored the show and all that. And I think they had Dumont cameras in there at that time. But later on, I got JP's. His name was Chris Wheatus, and I was keeping up with him up until he passed away. And I've got one of his books around here. But if you really want to see something interesting, just type in JP Patches of Cairo Television. I think JP Patches will do it. There's a long thing on, I think it's on YouTube too. They have a lot of his clown shows on it. You have to see it. I think more adults watch the show than children.
That brings up a possible program for a future convention, or at least a presentation here on one of our monthly meetings, and that is a synopsis, if not a history, of the KidVid shows that were popular in the different, at least the major markets, and some of the medium ones as well.
Of all the crazy things, Howdy Doody was produced by Ross Bagwell, who lives here in Knoxville now. And he was friends with Buffalo Bob, and he knew the Lone Ranger. What was his name? He lived next door to him, and they had a thing in Florida. But Ross was
Clayton Moore. Was
what-
Clayton Moore the name
Clayton
you're
Moore.
thinking of?
I think so. He was friends with a lot of those guys, but he was up in New York City before he moved back to Knoxville because his wife was from here. And you've heard of HGTV. He invented that, and Hey Dude and Nickelodeon, and he's still here in Knoxville, and his daughter married him to the Haslam family. If you don't know who the Haslams are, they own all the Pilot gas stations. They don't worry about money. And his daughter, Dee, her name is now Dee Haslam. She's got what do they call it? It's it's a video. Anyway, it's some kind of a television thing here in Knoxville. They produce shows for other things. But anyway, in his office, he has some display cases. I think he's since brought them back to his house. He has some of the cutest little puppets you've ever seen. Those puppets were made by the same puppeteer that made Howdy Doody. And he told me that he paid $20,000 a piece for those two puppets in 1955. You could buy a house for $20,000 back then. And he has other things, and he's got pictures of Buffalo Bob and what's the other one? Gene Autry. He's got a cowboy hat that belonged to Gene Autry, I think. But what a colorful guy. And if you ever want to hear what he used to do, his name is Ross Bagwell. Type that in YouTube, and there's a 30-minute interview with him. He's real funny. He started out with making commercials, and he bought a little Hitachi camera, like a little home use like thing, and he took it to a body shop and had it painted white, because when he was soliciting for doing advertising for people around, he couldn't say, well, I have a little Hitachi camera. He called it I can't remember names, but we'll say XL100. But anyway, they'd say, well, what type of a camera have you got? He says, well, I have this XL100 here. And they'd say, yeah, I've heard about those, and people go along, and how he had a shill office one time for Waffle House. He was doing something for them, and he staged an office like this was his office. And all of a sudden, one of his guys got up and he was going to the bathroom, and he walked into a closet. I think it gave it away. He's a funny guy. But type in Ross Bagwell and on that, and it's something to watch. And JP Patches, it's worth watching in their show up there. And they have shows. They have videotape that exists, and it's a lot of fun to watch. I have one of his books that he wrote there, and I have it here somewhere, and I can't find it. I hope it didn't get thrown out accidentally, but he died not long after I got that. One of my Patches pals, he said.
Assuming my stuff is working, I'll say hi right now because I'm going to have to run. I'm at the Broadcast Museum. We have an event this evening and I'm eating dinner. So if you don't mind me eating dinner on camera, hopefully have a great time.
As long as you brought enough for everyone.
There probably is enough for everyone actually down there. It looks like a lot of food. But I got my piece of pecan pie right here.
I'm hungry.
I'm rather fond of this stuff.
Well, I hope you brought enough for both of us.
No, I don't think so. It's all mine. The lady that's a caterer makes it using maple syrup, which is kind of an interesting combination.
Burger would suffice for me.
I blipped out there for a moment. Did
Yeah,
any
you
how was the weather up there for their little powwow they had a few weeks ago up there in Columbus? I didn't go because the weather report looked pretty bad, that it's going to be thunderstorms all morning, and I thought, well, I don't know. How was the weather up there? Did I miss out on a bright sunny day there? My luck?
You did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't miss out on a sunny day, but it really wasn't much in the way of rain. It looked like it was going to be a problem, and several people set up inside the warehouse, but it turned out to be not a bad day at all.
That's my luck. I figured it'd be that,
Yeah.
but I just didn't want to take the chance because I was going to bring a lot of stuff up there. Oh, well, there's always next spring there.
There's next spring. Yep, that's for sure.
Hmm.
Shall we wait a few more minutes before we get started?
My time is your time.
Yeah, let's wait till 6:05. That's what we typically do.
If I could take advantage of the time, I'd like to ask a question, if I may.
Sure.
It seems like it's been kind of a long time now since I first heard that somebody was donating a bunch of CRTs and there was going to be some 7 DP4 electrostatic CRTs that were going to have to be tested before they'd be offered for sale.
Yes.
and
We
I
got
could
the shipment.
I could still use one, but I'm patiently
Well,
waiting to hear when they're ready.
We got a shipment, all right. And virtually all the tubes in that shipment were bad.
Ah,
They were duds. We have a few 7JP4s that we categorize as being weak.
yep.
And that we got out of it, and a few other good tubes, but most of them were duds.
Okay.
Yeah, that was disappointing.
Very disappointing.
Well, but not unexpected, I guess. I mean, I have 2 weak ones of my own. I was hoping to find that there were going to be, a plethora of these really good ones that came out of nowhere, but oh well.
That's unfortunately, this was apparently his pile of defective tubes.
Steve, can those dud envelopes, be used in your lab to rebuild?
No, I don't see. We're not going to be doing rebuilding. It's just not feasible from a management standpoint. Nick Williams at some point hopes to rebuild, and I don't think 7JP4s are possible. I think they're just they're so different from everything else. I think he's going to be focusing on the electromagnetic tubes and color tubes if and when he gets going.
When I was in high school, I worked for Tennessee Valley Tube Company here in Knoxville, and they rebuilt tubes. And they even rebuilt tubes for warranty returns for Magnavox when they were here years ago. But I know every aspect of building it, but the equipment that we worked on was early equipment. But boy, all his equipment that he had was built like a Mack truck. And that crossfire that you've got where they hang vertically, that seems a little light duty there. I don't see how they can hang a like a 21 FB on it or anything like that. But I learned all the aspects of doing that. But
Right.
back then you could buy tube mounts from Superior Tube Company, and the supplies, and nobody's making gun mounts for them now unless you can find somebody to do it.
Right. Well, I think we had our equipment was capable of doing tubes even up to the 30-inch, the 30 BP4s.
Wow.
The problem was the management, and we did successfully rebuild some tubes, but it's a whole different thing to produce them for collectors. It's a business, and nobody stepped forward that was interested in doing it. Our only hope now is Nick. I haven't heard recently any progress report from him. Dave, maybe you know something.
I talked to him a few weeks ago. He has not made any progress, but he still maintains that that is his goal, and he's working on a few things here and there. But right now, he's still far enough from the finish line that he can't say when that will be.
So the plan is to keep your lab intact, right?
Yeah, we're going to incorporate it into the museum display, so that people can walk through it as part of their tour of the museum and see all the equipment, and there'll be signs explaining what each thing does and so forth. That's the basic plan.
Now, where were you getting any gun mounts or any new gun mounts? Were they new old stock, or
Well,
is there somebody?
the idea was that existing guns would be rebuilt, new cathodes put in them, which appears to be feasible.
Because I
And the
remember,
other materials are there. That the glass is available. The
glass tubing.
everything else is available, or it was as of a year or so ago. So I don't think that's the problem. It's just having somebody be able to successfully do it on a production basis.
It's not a hard process to do. It's more in technique, like anything else.
Right.
You know,
And
it's a
again,
technique to it.
again, the technique and the process isn't the problem. It's the management of a business
Mhm.
that's the problem for us. Well, let's get started. Welcome to the October meeting. Dave, give your regular courtesy announcement, please.
Yeah, I'll just remind everybody, please keep your microphones off. I think we're all getting pretty good at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Going to start with a brief report on what's been going on at the museum. Two big things recently. One is we had the drawing for the prize of the sweepstakes, which was a TRK5. And one of our main supporters and board members who bought a lot of tickets, James O'Neill, won it, which I'm quite happy about. There's no more deserving a guy than James. And he's going to make arrangements to get it back to his home at some point. I don't know when. We raised about $12,700 in ticket sales, and then of course we spent about $2,500 having the cabinet restored. So we cleared over $10,000. So it was a successful sweepstakes. We're already planning for next year's, and we're going to have it. We're going to go back to the timing of having it, the drawing at the convention next year, and we're hoping for a really nice rare Predicta as the prize. We think that will have a broad appeal and would do very well. Back to the museum news. Had our swap meet a couple of weeks ago. Fairly well attended, about the same as before. I think there were probably 40 people here altogether. A lot of people sold stuff. A lot of people got good bargains on things. The museum sold several sets that we wanted to sell and raised about $2,000, which is, of course, helpful. Other thing that's been going on here is the, in preparation for the swap meet, I spent about 3 or 4 weeks building this large shelf area in the warehouse to consolidate some of the junk we've got on the floor. Got it finished, and then we had a bunch of volunteers who were here for the swap meet that helped load stuff on the shelves. Still got a long way to go in terms of loading stuff. Larry is working on it, and he's got a friend who's going to be coming over and working with him. I think next Saturday to get the stuff put up. I'll be showing that in a few minutes. I'm going to go through it a little mini tour in a bit. The other thing, I was able to start on the project of the expanded display area in the back. Again, I'll show you the progress there. The idea is to get the ceiling built first, and then plywood on the top of it, so that we can store CRTs up there, and then work on filling it in with the having a contractor do the construction of the display area. Another thing that's happened is that we have started the process of taking this first room as you go in the museum, which is relatively small, but using it as a rotating display area. And the first display is going to be a predicted display. Blake Hinkle brought a couple of sets down to begin it. He plans to launch it formally for the convention. And I'll be showing that again. So we have 2 sets on display, and then he's got a QR code up that takes you to a video of the history of Predicta. So that's what's been going on at the museum. I think everybody knows, I think I announced this before, but if not, I will again. We were hit with a citation by the city of Hilliard to do something about our parking lot, and it desperately needed it, but it's just been very expensive to get it done. We finally decided to bite the bullet and have it professionally rebuilt, and so we now have a nice new parking lot. They did a very nice job, and it'll last us for many years. And the other thing I think I mentioned was our QR codes that we've introduced. We're slowly adding to the displays in the museum. Now we've got most of the mechanical sets and most of the British pre-war sets have QR codes on the signs and have short presentations that the QR code takes you to that gives additional information about the individual set. So that's about what's going on with the museum. We'll be starting in end of November with our membership drive, people to renew for next year. Anybody have any questions or comments? Well, I guess that's a no.
How bad did the city hit you on there? They wanted you to redo your parking lot, is what it was, or?
Yeah, they didn't hit it. They just said it needed to be done by October 15th, and we just got a notice of violation of one of their codes. So there was no fine or anything involved. It was just a matter of complying with it.
How darn decent of them.
Which we needed to do anyway. We do have the annual fire. I just heard from Bob Dobush. We have the annual fire inspection coming up now. Bob will be handling that. I don't anticipate we're going to have any problems with that. I mean, there'll be some minor things because there always are, but nothing like a couple of years ago.
How are people reacting to charging admission? Out of curiosity.
Well, that's the other thing that's new. No reaction whatsoever. Occasionally, I think Larry's had a couple of people who have said $10, screw that, and turned around and walked out. But it's had a very minor effect. Everybody's paid. Everybody's happy with it.
Basically what we found in Texas too. Nobody
Yeah.
seems to blink an eye about it. I think we
Yeah.
might have had one person. We had somebody, we had some old brochures out that had the old price on it and said, okay, fine, we'll do that.
Right.
So, but that's as bad as it's got, and it's actually quite a bit more money when you add all this up.
Yep.
And a lot of times with the $8 senior thing, usually two of them, and frequently they'll hand you a $20 bill and tell you keep the change. At least that's
Exactly. We're having a lot of that.
yeah. Good. I'm glad it's the same thing in Ohio as it is in Texas.
Yep. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Chuck, take the blanket off your microphone.
What about Texas blanket?
Take the blanket off of your microphone.
Well, I don't have the microphone's a little tiny thing in this camera. I'm at the museum. We do not normally use this.
Yeah.
But
It's very woolly, that's all.
sorry about that. I think this camera cost $19.95 at Walmart.
Yeah, crank up the treble, and then we'll be fine.
Well, there is no treble control. There is no control whatsoever. There's just a little red light that says it's on, and a little cap that I can put over it to blank it out. What do you want for $20? You know.
All right.
I won't talk.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody who's news now? This is their first meeting. They'd like to introduce themselves. Well, I guess no.
Hello. I just unmuted my microphone.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a camera set up here. In fact, I just managed to get the Zoom working after several crashes on a error with updating. My name is Broward Hunter. It's been a long time, and I just have I don't even remember how I ran into finding your museum. But anyway, I just decided to look in and see what was going on. Say hello. I said my only experience with the kind of TV you're talking about was when I was in the fourth grade, or right before the fourth grade, when my neighbor got a TV set. This was 1948, and he was the town radio repair guy. And we went down and would watch TV there, and he let me find the station. Now, at the time, this was the only station. The town of Tavares is 30 miles northwest of Orlando. The nearest station was New Orleans. And then it was a Crosley. It looked like a rectangular screen, although it was masked. It was sitting on his bench, and fall of 48 and winter of 49, we went down several times and watched programs, and he let me tune in the station one time where you tune it like a radio, and it had a crank on the tuning knob so that you could run down the dial and find the station, and went looking for other stations. And so that was my first experience with a TV in 1948. Oh,
Well,
anyway.
welcome. Glad to have you. I imagine we have a set similar to that one in our collection. So if you
Thank
ever
you,
get a
sir.
chance, if you ever get a chance to get to Ohio, please come by and see us.
Okay. Do you remember me?
You know, your name, when you said your name, I said, it can't be that Broward Hunter.
Yes, it is. I
And
worked for you
anyway,
in
Broward.
1968, 1969,
Yeah.
making
Broward
cable
was,
TV.
that's right. I was, I lived in Florida. We just got into the cable business, and that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm still kicking.
Well, that's good.
Is Richard Reynolds still
No, Richard died
Oh, sorry.
about 2 years ago.
Okay.
He yeah, he had various forms of cancer, and it finally got
Oh.
him. He was a fighter, and he fought right to the end. But then there was nothing got to his brain, and there was nothing more they could do.
Uh-huh.
Well, good hearing from you, Broward. I hope you enjoyed the conversation tonight.
Okay. So far, it's over my head generally, but
Okay.
I'm
It
interested.
just depends upon what people bring up. Tonight we don't have a program. Often we have someone who makes a presentation about a particular topic. Tonight is just an open forum, so just depends upon who says what as to how technical it is. So, some of the stuff I don't understand. So you're not alone. All right. Anybody else?
Steve, I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yeah.
Al McKenzie here. I've followed you for a number of years, and actually, it's been a while, probably since we communicated. I got that prototype of the American ATC TV from the late 30s
Right.
that I had out here, and I'm finally getting around to wrestling with stuff I've got in the garage and stuff I've got in the basement in my collection, kind of figuring out what makes sense. So I probably am going to eventually pass it on to you guys. I think it's probably the best home for it. It's interesting set, but it's also missing the picture tube. So I don't know whether something like that it would be available. Again, I think it's from 1939 era.
Generally, those tubes they're hard to find, but they're out there.
They're still out there, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
And the museum has spares of a number of them, depending upon what size it is.
yeah. I'm not sure whether what the right size is, because it's kind of this window of it's all hand turned wood and stuff. So it's a prototype versus what was
Right.
shown in their ads, and it's mainly runs on a umbilical cord to the radio phonograph console. Typically, is what it was. set
Right.
up.
I remember what the set you're talking about now.
Yeah. Yeah, one of these days when I get around to it, figure out how to. It's a bit of a beast.
All right.
The ships. So I'm out in the Seattle area.
Right. That's right.
A ways away, but so I'll put
Well-
it on my to-do lists.
We'd love to have it anytime, and we can help with getting it here. So
Okay.
just get in touch.
Okay, yeah,
All right. Thanks. Welcome. Glad you're on tonight.
yeah.
You might, I wonder if you could maybe at a future meeting aim your camera at it, let people see it, because it's a very unusual set.
Yeah, I've got it in the back room here. I mean, I've got my iPad here, so I could walk over there and
Sure.
See if-
I think,
see if I
right.
can get it on the screen. I'm not sure. I don't know whether I can reverse the camera on this where it's not facing me, but the other way. I don't know all the tricks of Zoom these days. Otherwise, I can take it in and just show you. I guess we'll give it a
Okay.
try. It's like I'm also working on a rowing museum out here at the University of Washington, and that's even older stuff. So I've got a whole back room of oars and rowing shells and stuff like that from the late 1880s up until who knows where. So, and bits and pieces of boats. It's a real,
You've got a range of collectibles.
well, it's, yeah, the old stuff, yeah, radios were kind of my primary interest. That I got into all this when I was in the Army in South Carolina, and then used to run out to Pennsylvania and stuff. And I found the ATC set I found in a flea market in New Jersey in Englishtown. I just happened to I don't know why I even stopped, because I was going back home to South Carolina. I walked by this thing and said, that looks like a planter. And then I saw knobs and the fact that it swiveled. I said, hell no, that's looks like part of the TV. I don't know. Is there?
I used to live up there in New Jersey. That Englishtown Flea Market's a huge place and still is. Al, did you ever work for any of the TV stations in Seattle? Channel 4, 5, or 7?
Uh-oh, he may have hit the mute button by mistake.
Yeah.
I think he did.
Mute's off. Can you hear me or not?
We can
heard
hear
you
you
then.
now.
Huh?
Al, did you ever work for any of the TV stations in Seattle? Channel 4, 5, or 7?
No. No.
How long have you lived in Seattle?
Was born there, grew up there, and then spent 5 years in the Army in South Carolina. It was kind
Did
of
you
my
ever
main-
know a Norman Ahlquist?
Norman Olquist? No.
When he
See,
was
so-
when he was 14 years old, he built an IO camera, Image Orthicon, and he
Huh.
took technical manuals from like RCA and Westinghouse and a few others, and he picked out circuits that he liked best and built
Huh.
this camera. And I now have that camera in my collection now. I mean, the
Huh.
most brilliant person I've ever met, but anyway.
Any Zoom experts out there? Can I flip this camera iPad so it's face? Otherwise, if I flip it to show the TV screen in the
Al, there should be a little circular icon at the top right. It's a little thing in a circle.
is this in the Zoom menu or is it?
No, it's in your
No.
iPad menu.
Okay, but if I'm
I've hit it
Yeah.
accidentally and scared the heck out of myself because this old man shows up on my iPad whenever I do that. And I just don't recognize him.
well, right now the iPad's on, but I'm a small window on the Zoom setting.
You'd have to go to the camera icon on the iPad, and the setting for the two cameras is there.
Okay, so I've got to zip out of Zoom. Um,
Or you could just turn it around.
well, that's what I was.
Yeah, the brute force approach. We'll let you know
Right.
which way to move it. Just
Oh.
turn it around.
You know, the thing is, I can't. Oops. Can't see. Well, maybe I can. I'm going to turn around, but I'm not small in the corner, so I can't quite see. I can get my fingers out of the way. So that's, oh, that's a view or not. I can't, I can barely see the window here. Let me back up. Is that visible or not?
Yes, it is.
So that's in the closed position, and then I'll
Yeah, that's a nice view. That's probably the most unusual pre-war set you're going to see.
Back here. That's not the best view.
Al, how many years ago did you buy that set from Englishtown?
I was in the 70s when I was in the Army, 1975.
Were you in the Signal Corps up there?
No, I was in the Dental Corps, basic training base at Fort Jackson.
Because I was at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey up there, not far from Englishtown. And I used to go up there in the early 70s and find stuff.
So this is, I guess I got kind of a side view here.
Yeah,
That's wild.
that's an amazing, amazing set.
Well, it's, yeah, just the craftsmanship. I mean, it's
Yep.
like,
Yeah,
it just kind of blew me over.
right.
And I think you've got, I think I sent you a bunch of photos
Yeah, I've got a bunch of pictures on the website.
on the website. And I've
Oh.
got some, I've done some research, found some ads and articles and stuff by guys who were in the company at the time, back in the 30s. So I'll kind of pull all that stuff together again. It's kind of buried. I'm just getting around.
Who was the manufacturer of that set?
ATC, American Television Corporation. And they were based in New York City. But they didn't, I don't think they survived World War II. I think that's, 39, I think, was when everything, TV just kind of had come out, I think, in what, 38, 39, and then, of course, the war effort. A lot of that quieted down. And TV finally kind of came back to like that in the late 40s.
Well,
So,
thank you, Al.
anyhow, for what it's worth, yeah, I'll start passing on more of the stuff I've collected.
Okay, great.
As I age out,
Do you
kids aren't.
still have the lead suit that you should be wearing when you view that?
Don't have it, not part of my collection.
Yeah.
Antique radio TV stuff is kind of, as we age out, is what's the best home for some of these things. And I think with what you've got going, it's where this belongs. So.
Well, we certainly think so. All right. Is there anybody else that wants to introduce themselves? Thanks, Al.
Yep.
Okay, so am I on now, Dave?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, then I think I figured out how to flip this around the other way. Yes, I did. How about that? What I'm going to do is for people who have not been to the museum or haven't been here for a while, I thought I would just do a quick tour to show you the facilities. And I'm not going to focus on any particular set, but I thought I'd just show you around each room and some of the stuff in the back. this is our,
Hey, Steve, excuse me.
yeah.
If you're able to turn your phone horizontally, I think most people will get a better picture.
um,
If you're not, we'll live with it.
let me see. I don't see why not.
There we go.
How's that work?
Looks good to me.
Okay, this is our entry room where the front door and where Larry sits, collects money and sells various. We have T-shirts and stuff like that. We have just about every inch of our wall covered with signs and pictures and whatever else we've come up with. Now, this room is the room I mentioned is going to be the temporary display room. Right now, we've still got some of our British pre-war sets in here. They're going to be moved out next spring and put in storage, and it's going to be a Philco display. Here are the two sets that Blake has brought so far, but he's promised he's going to bring a whole bunch of sets and stuff to go on the walls and so forth. And it's going to be here for about a year. And our plan is to rotate it with other displays that feature specific things. I'll come back to this room. But we start people on the tour back here. This is the mechanical room where we have a whole bunch of different mechanical sets. Several of them work. The Baird televisor, for instance, and the Empire State, which is right here, works, as does the RCA 60 line set. And we have a camera for it in this small room. It's partially old. This huge cabinet that has the reflectors in it was the photocell cabinet from RCA's television camera in New York in the late 20s. And the rest of it we fabricated with more modern stuff. And it's hooked up to the RCA 60 line set over here in the corner. Our next area is the British pre-war room. And we have a nice collection of British sets from 1936 through 39 of various styles. Probably now is a good time. Here is our, I don't know if you can see this well, but there is a QR code on this sign. And most, as I said, most of the sets in this room and in the mechanical room have them now. The plan is to have them everywhere. Now we go into the American pre-war set room, one of the early iconoscope cameras, prototype RCA set. And then RCA's product lines and Andrea sets. Here is the prize in the, not the dog, but the TV set is the prize in the sweepstakes. This is Nipper, about 6 feet tall, on loan from one of our board members, and been here for quite a while. More pre-war sets, GE's line. And here we have Westinghouse sets and the first pre-war projection set. The next room is post-war, and it's mostly chronological, starting in some prototypes in 45 and going through the late 40s. Many of the sets work. Here are our collection of electrostatic deflection sets. A good variety of different kinds of sets. More down at this end. The second row, one end of it is a little bit newer sets. There's a Sylvania Duelat and an RCA metal cabinet set and sets from the 50s. At the back of the room is a Royal Sovereign. And there's a Predicta. This end is projection sets from the late 40s. We have here's a Berkshire, which is a monstrous top of the line RCA set, and a bunch of other models. At the end, there's a Clubman, which is an RCA. These were designed basically for clubs and bars. This row is color. Here's a 1952 prototype CPA set from RCA before NTSC was developed. This is CBS Field sequential equipment. Many of these sets work. And then these are later sets. Here's the CT100 in operation. They come on automatically when you walk into the room. We don't leave them on all the time. And then all kinds of early 15 and 19-inch sets up through the 21-inch sets that the vertical needs to be adjusted on. And I'll come back in this room for the other end of it. More color sets here, including a super rare Raytheon 15-inch color set. May have been the first set sold to the public, but we don't know for sure. And then our collection of European sets, British, French, and German. At the end is a Kuba Comet, which always, people who are not terribly technical love this set. This is one of the highlights when people are coming through the museum. Now this end is a display of well, here's some color tell, and color adapter, color converters, and a collection on this side of various CRTs going back to the 20s, and then some of the early color CRTs, and then on this side is a collection of camera tubes of various sorts. Then the last display area is our broadcast equipment room. We have a 1948 television van that came from a local station here, was donated, and a good variety of early black and white and color cameras. Here's a complete (1948) transmitter, some videotape machines. Now we're going to go back into the back area, the final part of the museum. This area is where we hold the convention. And our big problem is that we keep getting stuff donated. And every year we have an auction. here's the shelves that we built. This, 4 levels, and we hope to put a ton of stuff and clear up a bunch of this stuff that's loose on the floor here. This is the CRT rebuilding room. Right now a lot of stuff is being stored. In fact, these are some of these, the collection of defective CRTs ended up here on their way to the trash, but you can see all the CRT rebuilding equipment. And we hope to plan to make this part of our museum tour. And we'll do that through this area, which is our next construction project. We just started on it. But this area right here, between that over on this side over here that's the outside of where the European sets were. And you can see the framing that we're putting up in the top. This area where all these CRTs are stored is going to be a display area. And you'll be able to walk from the European room into here. And our plan there is to display, make just a sort of a concise display of sets from say the 60s on. We concentrate on stuff that's really early. And so we want to have more stuff that is more up to date. So we'll probably have a couple of sets from each decade up through the present day. And by building this ceiling up here, we'll be able to take all the CRTs that are stored in here and put them up top. And then a contractor could come in and build put drywall in and so forth. Okay, well, that's the museum. Let me go back up to the front. I notice I'm about out of power on the phone, so I need to plug it back in.
Steve, how big is your museum space?
Display area is about 6,000 square feet now. And the whole building is around 11,000.
So from the building I'm working on at the university is around 13,000 square feet. It's an airplane hangar built in World War I and then turned over to the university rowing program because the war finished before they actually were able to occupy it. But one of the things we're in the process, we just finished fundraising or close to being done to restore it and turn it into kind of a rowing museum and event center. But there's a individual done what's a kind of a 3D walkthrough of the facility as it is now with the various displays we have as far as its history. It was a military training base revolving around World War I and then turned over the rowing program and then eventually a canoe house, aquatic center, so on. And so the 3D tour is one way of kind of showing the different elements. And you've got a ton more stuff than we have as far as a rowing display. And it's an interesting way of allowing people to walk through. And then you can have with your QR codes and other stuff on different sets, people can zoom in on that and then kind of get additional information on what they're looking at. So I can send you a sample of what we've done. It might be something for you guys to look at just to give people a better idea of, what you have if they are unable to visit personally, it's one way of displaying what you have and telling the stories of the different sets and equipment.
I wonder if we lost Steve.
Looks, we may have.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about the rowing museum, I thought that people that collected old black and white TVs were kind of strange, and a rowing museum is also fairly esoteric. But the other day I met a guy who collected anvils. So they're all out there.
Yeah.
We're not necessarily the craziest ones.
Another friend in our radio group also has a small farm just outside of Seattle, but he's got a couple of different metal buildings, and he's got a tool collection that goes back. Some of the stuff goes back to the Civil War, and of course he conducts tours, and he likes to bring kids through and say, "What was this tool used for?" And of course he's some old tool catalogs back turn of the century, kind of tell you, but you look at some of the tools and implements, and you just have to scratch your head trying to figure out. And he gets a kick out of trying to stump people.
I think one of the strangest collections that I've ever seen, talking about weird, about 20 some years ago when Fox Television had the collectors show, they included me when they were here in Knoxville. But I learned there's a guy that collects back in the 50s, 60s motel rooms. When they would sanitize the toilet, they put this paper wrap around the toilet seat.
Yeah.
Say sanitized by so and so. There's a guy that collects those paper bands that they put around toilets. Now that's weird. I don't know if there's a convention for toilet paper or anything like that, but it wouldn't surprise me if somebody comes up with a book on them.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. Probably doesn't take up a lot of room unless
There's Steve again.
I am back with a different phone. I don't know what happened. Mine just suddenly decided not to work. So anyway, anybody have any questions, comments?
Steve, while you're in the color TV room, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. While you're in the color TV room, you mentioned some CBS sequential sets. Are those the kind with the color wheels in them?
Yes.
Ah, yeah. I can remember when I was in this, getting to the 7th grade gave me access to the library. And I can remember one of the first books that I read was had this article about how color TV worked, which was a new thing. And it had pictures of that system as well as the 3 CRT and the shadow mask system shown. So that was very interesting to me. So interesting that I can still see the pictures in my mind from that book in the 7th grade.
Oh, wow.
So thank you very much. That was a wonderful tour.
Any other comments or questions? If not, let's just move on to anybody have anything they want to talk about.
Do you have a road map through the museum?
A road map?
Yeah. I think I'd get lost walking through there.
That's sort of a problem. a lot of times people, because it's sort of confusing to get out. And so people often have to ask Larry, how do I get out of here?
Steve, your phone may have quit when I was mentioning out here for the Rowing Museum. We had an individual do a scan of the interior with all the elements and displays and stuff. And so it's available online where you can essentially walk into the building and then scroll around, look at the different objects and get information on it. It might be something you've got.
Oh,
quite a bit more stuff than we've got, and maybe something for you to look at. So people that can't travel necessarily to Ohio get to see what you have.
That's a great idea.
And I'll send you the example of what we've done so you can.
Great.
Yeah, Steve, this is Walt, N8NXT. I'd like to make a couple comments if I may.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been to the museum about 4 years ago, and thank you very much for the video tour today. I do have a photographic memory, and so I remember quite a bit about the layout of the museum. One thing I would like to tell people from my recollection was that the size of the museum is quite a bit larger than I think the average person might assume. You guys mentioned 6,000 square feet. I would say it took me, at a leisurely rate to, 2.5 to 3.5 hours to get through it. And, you could be quicker, you could be longer, but it's quite a good size. It's really worth the trip. And, coming in through the greeting area, the door, and then you go, of course, through the British area, which you said is going to be the new Philco area. And then I do remember going off to the right into the mechanical room. And one thing that sort of stuck out to me was how big the sets were relative to what size the screen was, either looking at a neon tube or a small little window, 2 inches, 4 inches. Kind of small, but then in the camera room, you had up on the left on a shelf the Felix the cat, which was the first image done, I guess, during development and testing. But then going on to the room had the bar sets along the back wall on the right. Those bar sets, I think, were quite impressive, even by today's flat screen standards. How big they were for the time. And then you guys did have at the end of one room, it was a large black and white. I think it was a round, like a 32-inch round CRT. Right. It was functioning when I was there. You turned it on for me, and I was surprised at how good the picture was, and just the size of that was very impressive. Overall, I was quite happy, and I thought the museum was really quite amazing. Its size. It's got so much to look at. Anybody who the video tour is great, but I would encourage anybody who's within, say, 400 miles or less, definitely should come in person. It's really, really quite extensive, and I was very impressed.
Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So keep up the good work. That's all my comments were. I'd want to encourage people. The video is great, but and I appreciate it, but I would encourage them, to get out there. It's really worth it. It's worth the drive because it's not just a little area. It is quite extensive. Anyways, those are my 2 thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm a little late to the program. I've been watching, but you didn't need to see me cooking dinner, so I just joined. I'm I'm hoping I have a color tell question, and I don't need to clog up this part of it. So after the meeting, if Jim Hawes can stick around and help me out with a little tiny something. And he seems to be our current expert on color tell, color adapters, as I read on his website. And I appreciate that and hope for a little bit of help.
I'll stick around as long as my battery allows, and I have to say that much of what I learned, I got from Cliff Benham. I'm so
Cliff Benham was a friend of mine, a friend of the museum. We will miss him, and his expertise is just almost irreplaceable. But Jim, you're filling in the blanks. Thank you.
Thanks. I wanted to tell a short story about him. I haven't had time to put it up on the web. When I started studying color tell, I got interested because of Peter Yancer's old club, where I met a lot of you guys. I wrote Cliff and I asked him if I could document some of his work. And about the same time, I decided I found Stanley Lebar's web address, his home email address. I was searching on the web. I thought, what a coincidence! You never find this stuff. So I wrote him and asked him about the moon cams because I thought there were some parallels between those and color tell. And I started asking him questions, and he was answering back. And I told him that I had communicated with this guy, Cliff Benham, that seemed to know a lot about color tell and that there were some similarities. And I was telling him about Cliff's work. And I referred him to this web page that I put up that talked about color tell on the moon, because, you know, the color tell receiver is the exact opposite of the moon cams. And I was drawing this comparison. Well, Stanley, being very conservative about it, said he didn't know anything about color tell, but he thought that was interesting, apparently. And then I think that's why he walked up to Cliff, having never seen him before, and said, "I've always wanted to meet you." I wasn't there that day, but I think I was the missing link, and so glad that I was. I wrote.
I was there that day, and I think Cliff had a scar on his jaw for the rest of his life from his jaw dropping when Stan said that to him.
I'm sure that if Cliff had been available in the day, Stanley would have drawn upon his talents because he was so talented and had so much knowledge. But he actually vindicated me. I said, drawn this comparison. I said, well, I bet you could have connected a color tell without the converter to the moon cam and gotten a picture. And Cliff actually built the two pieces and hooked them together and proved that it was right. So they had to be the same because they were both working with a hybrid between the CBS color system and the NTSC. So they had to follow basic NTSC for the black and white picture, and then do an overlay that used every third field to make a partial picture, and going at a very, very slow rate for the full picture, only 10 frames per second. But that was neat to find all that out. And I found out more because a Mexican college student was doing research into the color tell on the moon, essentially the moon cams. And I had this page on how they reproduced the moon pictures with an elaborate electromechanical system in Australia and in the US. And I had to sharpen up my webpage and do more research because I found out all sorts of strange things about the system that they were using with one of the early slow motion analog discs. I was fortunate to talk to some of the engineers that were using the first ones when I had my internship with the International Radio and Television Foundation back in 1973. And I just had to do some thinking and found out that the slow motion disc machines that they used didn't have enough didn't have enough different layers, platters on them to have been used the way they were using it for Apollo. And I said, well, how the heck did they do this? I think they must have used, and I've never found this in the literature, but I think they must have used a modified recorder with one extra platter, or else they would have had to use two disk systems that were somehow electronically synchronized. And I put that on the webpage. So that's what I learned when I was trying to answer some questions. So I'm hoping that Dave will give me a question like that I can
Now,
learn from.
my question's going to be pretty simple on a mechanical part of it, so we'll save that for later.
Okay, it's a deal.
Hey, Jim, I've got a complete color tell system. I finally found the electronics for it from out west, but it's missing the plug that plugs into the disc assembly itself. It's like a little 7-pin plug, but I have the complete electronics for it. I might need a little help with that. I'd like to get mine working, and it's in pretty nice shape, so it should be a viable system there.
Oh, I think you could do it. I think it's probably, you're going to have to recap it, of course.
Yeah, well, yeah, that goes without saying, but still, yeah, I might need some help on that thing a little bit. But anyway, yeah.
I'll do what I can. Of course, I don't have one to compare it to, so I'm going by what I've learned from Cliff.
Now, the other thing about the color tell, of course, is that it has to be connected to a TV set, and that can be sort of tricky. They have, it has to have enough bandwidth to pass the 3.58, and so that gets into alignment issues and so forth. So it's not an easy process to get those things working.
No,
Cliff had a funny story there on his first set that he converted back in 1960. He was a young teenager, and he couldn't get the signal to go through. And Never Say Die, he went in and cut out the sound trap, and it fixed it. He got the picture.
In my case, I have two Philco sets which pass the full bandwidth needed. RCA's don't. They stripped it off and narrowed it down for whatever reason. They don't work well. Philco's work great.
Yeah,
I was going to ask. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask that question. What is the best television to use with a color tell? And I've seen them with RCA's, but what would be the best thing to black and white set to use on it, in your opinion?
Something before 1950 that has a silver picture tube that has the brightest picture you can get with it, and it's got to be a 7 to 10 inch. If you go bigger than that, you have to use the size control, and Cliff doesn't recommend that because that depends on putting a lot of stress on the coils that are already there, and sometimes you can burn those up, which you don't want to do. So he hated the size control, and I could see why. You're loading that thing to get the picture to go smaller. So better to start with a picture that's already the right size.
So a 10-inch would be acceptable at the largest, or?
I don't know I can't remember if the 14 might be the largest, but I think 10 to 10 is the range. And also those are the sets that you're going to find from the late 40s. You know, the sets before they put a lot of fancy stuff in the sync circuits, for example, and that you can fool with more. I had a page on, I think there was one called True Tone, and there were some others. Cliff recommended.
Go ahead, Jim.
I just went through Morgan McMahon's book with his two books with old TVs, and I came up with a bunch of them. There were some scope sets and so on that had smaller round tubes, and then Cliff had some that he preferred, and I can't remember. I think it might have been a Philco that he used, but there's a web page that I put up. It's all about that.
The 10-inch works the best because it matches the whole cutout size on the scanning disc. It matches up great. You don't have to use the size control. Just tie it up, with a lot of connections, but it works. Not well, but it works.
Would a 7-inch electrostatic set work with one of those?
It might, but the picture might not be bright enough. And in that case, Cliff had a second solution. He recommended a different gels to use on the scanning disc, because you could block out the whole picture. You're going to lose 90% of the brightness with the disc in order to get, that's the contrast range. So you have no choice if you're going to get a good color picture with good saturation. That was what he told me. And then he recommended certain gels. And I can't remember the name of the company that makes those, but that's on my website too.
Ratten. It's
Get
Ratten.
one with a luminized picture.
Yes.
He said
A
luminized
luminized picture tube is the best.
So would it
Yeah.
like an RCA ATS 30 be acceptable? Did they make many of those tubes with aluminized?
Well, the
That-
problem with the RCAs is they narrow down the bandwidth
No.
to eliminate, all that color information. They didn't need that back then. They just chopped it down to 2.5 or something like that. You want
Yeah, you didn't want
a full 4, whatever it is, bandwidth.
Otherwise, you're going to have to cut into the set somehow, and the RCA sets can get pretty complicated from looking at schematics.
Yeah, I've experienced that. So what, a Philco 10-inch or something, 1949 Philco or something like that? Does anybody have
Yeah,
a favorite?
It has to be before 1953.
Yeah, that's the wider bandwidth that they pass through. That works.
You know,
Hello
that- you're
there.
getting a good. Yeah, because remember, you're taking whatever was on this, got all the way to the CRT, and then running it back. So if you've gone through a bunch of filters by that time, for whatever purpose, whether they're sound or whether they're picture filters, you're going to lose the stuff that you want to reproduce.
Hello there. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is Doug McDonald. Are you listening to me?
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
I have a suggestion. If I were to try to do a color tell thing, which I'd really like to do, I've got the set to use for it right back there, which I don't have the lid up on. And it's a TRK-12. And the great thing about the TRK-12 is that if you carefully look at the frequency response of the IF strip, you'll discover that it's absolutely identical to that of the CT100. So it would, produce the perfect example of the perfect output to feed to some external color decoder. That's my thought. The other reason I would like to use that one, is the fact that it has one of those British refurbished radar tubes with the modern phosphor, and the thing is incredibly bright. It's unbelievably bright. It's enough for a projection set, and it would produce a brilliant picture. Of course, it's a little big, and it would take a pretty big wheel. But other than that, I've always thought of perhaps doing it, except I don't think I have room to fit all the stuff. But anyway, it's a thought.
Well, the first issue there is you have to take a round disc in front of a front viewing TV, and now you've got to turn it horizontally and fit it underneath a TRK platform. I don't know how you would do it. I have no clue.
I wasn't going to do that. I was going to actually, just as a demonstration, I was going to make a wheel about that big and make it a personal viewer.
No, if you could build your viewer and lay it on top of
Oh yeah.
the standard CRK-12 assembly, maybe, but then you lose, or you got big obstructions into the mirror to really see the thing.
Well, I think he's talking about the Gilly model where you're looking through the disc at your viewing place and you're filtering your eyes versus filtering the CRT. There's a ETF has a couple of articles on this guy that built something like that.
You know, that's exactly what I was thinking about.
Okay.
Yeah, that part would be easier, but then you still have to cope with the electronics.
Some years ago at the ETF there, some guy brought in a homebrew, a color wheel, and he was using like a 12-inch black and white video monitor. And that thing worked so well that if you didn't know that there was a color wheel in it, you would swear that you were watching a color CRT. And I forgot who it was, but I remember asking him about it, and he said he'd been using parts out of it. I was trying to see if he'd sell it to me or something, but that went nowhere, you know. But I mean, do you remember that when he had one there at ETF?
I don't remember that, but before Jim and before Cliff was Danny Gustafson out of the Chicago area, who was quite the expert.
Danny, it wasn't Danny, it was another one. This guy built one in a wood case. And I mean, it worked, like I said, it worked so well that just watching it, you'd swear you were looking at a color CRT. It was like new and improved and all that. But I never did.
Cliff's very first one might have been a monitor set. And then he tweaked the filters by hand. It was Roscoe Lux that made those. I remember now. And there were different numbers than the Ratten filters that were on the original ColorTel, but Cliff had managed to figure out by density and by color the ones that were very closest to the original Ratten ones, and then he would modify that depending on the color of the phosphor in the CRT, and he knew all about that too. So I mean, he could get very close to a color CRT. And I'm sure he was very good with bearings and so on, so that he had almost noise-free performance.
It was noise-free pretty much. Is he still around, or what's he doing now?
No, he died. He died earlier this year.
Oh, wonderful.
And Dave Johnson, who's also dead, used to have. I think his set might have gone to the museum. He used to have an original one that worked very well. And I thought the colors were kind of pastel. Cliff's looked actually a little bit better. But as I say, he tweaked everything personally, and he had his own methods of doing that. Did a beautiful job.
No one.
Yeah, some of the earlier monochrome CRTs were actually better for the CBS system because they had a broader spectrum. Later monochrome CRTs, the phosphor was actually two components, a purplish blue and a greenish yellow that balanced out to make a bluish white, but they would have very little deep red. So Cliff ended up having to play with the red filters depending on the CRT, because some CRTs, although the white looks white, it doesn't have a lot of deep red in it.
So that was the reason.
I picked mine up about 15 years ago, still in the box, actually. I wired it, as the factory said, into this Philco set, and I used spade connectors so I could connect it, disconnect it if needed. And it was about 6 or 8 connectors into the set. And then along comes Daryl Hawk and his little Colortel adapter, which needed 1 pulse, which, I mean, it was a vertical pulse or something. That's all it needed to operate. And you just fed, red, blue, or, video, audio, video into it. Standard NTSC video. That's all it needed. And that pulse, so I could disconnect all of the spade connectors from the original amp and just keep that 1 pulse that's needed. The original box, when played on a set, was awful. The resolution just vanished. It was, somebody's name on the bottom was just a little blur. With Daryl's, it was much, much better. But I've got a sync problem right now. It's not getting up to speed. So we'll figure that out.
You mentioned the Moon camera being kind of a hybrid between CBS and NTSC. And recently I saw on eBay some press photos for the CBS system. They're being sold by somebody in Australia, but they're all photos from the US. And one of them is Goldmark standing next to a huge diagram showing all the kinds of cameras that could be used to create a field sequential color signal, and then all of the types of displays that can be used to display it, because they were trying to counter the arguments that a mechanical color wheel is a bad thing. So they created this diagram that said, well, if you get a 3-2 color camera, you can always process the signal to be field sequential and broadcast it that way. So they tried to argue both sides of the street in terms of getting the system adopted.
Well, I remember Cliff a few years ago famously took a tricolor picture tube and put a CBS standard picture on it, which is what they always said they could do, which was, if they had that to illustrate, they would have fared better, maybe been able to start earlier with their system and not go all the way to the Supreme Court with their arguments against RCA. But it was too late. And then they came out with Chromacoder, which was interesting. And when I talked to Stanley Lee Barr, he thought that apparently thought that I was referring to Chromacoder. He said, we didn't do it that way. We did it this other way. Well, the other way was Colortel, essentially, was the opposite of Colortel. Colortel was throwing away color, and they were producing color. And if you put the two together, you get exactly a good color picture, but it's flickery. It has to flicker because there's too much missing.
Yeah, and if you get rid of the flicker by recombining things, as it did to feed NTSC at the end, you still have color breakup, and you see that in the images of the lunar lander blasting off from the moon. The pieces that go flying are suddenly red, green, and blue pieces, and it's for people who know how that was done. You look at it and say, yeah. And for people who don't know, say, what is that the rocket produced all this confetti?
Yeah. Well, they got a lot with a little bit of money, and just imagine how hard it would have been to put a color camera of the day with the 3 tubes in there. It would have weighed as much as as an extra astronaut, or more. So I think they were awfully clever, and I think they got their money's worth out of it.
Now, this is a really good discussion on a narrow, tiny little slice of color television that was designed to be an alternative to buying a full-size RCA set, for a third of the price or whatever. Now, it's fun that there's a handful of us around that still like this dumb system and try and keep it working. Thank you, Jim.
Well, thanks. I'm interested in that, and someday I'll have time to put together a presentation. There were 2 systems that were even rarer than ColorTel. There were many that were rarer than ColorTel, but one of them went to the CES and made a lot of waves, and that was Spectrac. And
never heard of it.
Yeah, Spectrac had only 2 colors, and instead of a disc and spinning in front of it, it had a belt, and the belt had 2 levels that you looked at the CRT through, and the belt was only going at a few inches per second, so there was no big strain on the motor, no big motor, and not only that, but it was a rectangular format instead of a disc. So theoretically, you could build one of those that would fit on a widescreen from today, and it would still work. But they were underfunded, and they were depending on getting a loan from the Canadian government. This was a Canadian company, and it didn't go through. So that was the end of it.
Was that something like original 2-strip Technicolor, which was kind of orangish and turquoise?
It was 2 colors. What they did is they glued the color filter to the face of the TV, the CRT.
Oh.
Then they had a 2-layer black stripe filter going in front of that would block either the cyan or the magenta, or the cyan or the red, and then you'd see one or the other. So obviously your resolution would be lower. The system didn't flicker though, because it was only 2 colors, so you could have every other field. And then it didn't reproduce every other field either. So it threw away one field so it could keep up with the black and white picture. So you lost a lot of information. And of course, the colors weren't exactly right. But if you're reproducing faces like Johnny Carson they used for the example, it looked just perfect because it was right on flesh tones for any race. And I thought that was awfully clever. And I even did a simulation of how the stripe filters went across. But then I discovered that the National Radio Institute, where I got one of my certificates, had invented another one, or actually bought a company that invented it. And this one had a vibrating screen that went back and forth. And it actually was as good as far as I can tell, was as good as Spectrac. So those 2 systems in the late 60s were going at once. And
that color combination, that 2-color, sure sounds like the early 1920s Technicolor version of what they thought was color, which was kind of a reddish orange and a turquoise, which would get you close, but it didn't reproduce blue very well.
They know the blues and the greens. You can't get green grass with that. You can't get blue sky with that, but you'll get colors that are very, very, very close. Getting colors like yellow that are combinations of these other colors is hard because you can't separate the blue and the green. And, you have to have a little bit of red and a little bit of green to make yellow. So some of those colors will appear as a color if you're lucky. And if they don't, they appear as gray. So you have more grays in this picture than you do with a 3-color picture. But they're dead on for the faces, and that's where people are most critical. So, and the face tones are excellent on these systems. So, and because TV in old TV anyway, not so much HD TV, but the old TV was mostly head and shoulder shots anyway.
Right.
You're going to get a lot in talk shows, for example. They use for an example. Those would be pretty good. If you're going to show two people dancing, for example, that's different. You're
Yeah,
gonna have
Cliff, one year at ETF had a two-colored disc system playing next to a three-color, and I have pictures of that. I'm not sure if those pictures are on the ETF website. I think they ought to be.
Well, I have some of them. I have some of the pictures. I have a website that's got his Wizard of Oz pictures on it, and they were quite good. But you're dealing with a fantasy land where it didn't really matter that they were a little bit off.
Yeah, the ones the pictures I recall, he had some scenes of a country and Western musical program. And so, of course, there were colors in the clothing that the two-color system couldn't reproduce. But on the other hand, if you didn't have the three-color system to compare to, how would you know? You know?
Right. Well, you're going to notice that you see a lot of cyan in the backgrounds, and I figured that the only place with the moon landings that they would have had trouble if they had gone to a two-color system. It would have been much easier to convert it on Earth, and it would have been easier to make the cameras. And I thought, well, the moon is mostly gray anyway, so who cares? The spacesuits look like spacesuits. The space caps, the spaceship had mostly gray and white inside of it, so you wouldn't see much difference there. But the place that would really matter is they put up the flag, red, white, and blue. And I thought, what's going to happen here? I will show. So on my website, I show the flag in red, white, and blue, and I show it in cyan and red. And you can get it pretty close. If you don't see the two side by side, you probably won't notice that you're looking at sort of a teal color for the blue. It's the dark blue. It comes out teal. And the red has much more orange in it than a regular red. It's more of a Chinese red. It doesn't have that rich color that the red on most of our flags has. So you could get away with it. I think the whole moon landing would have worked, but it wouldn't be very scientific. You couldn't say that these are the scientifically accurate colors, for example. And I think there was one moon rock that was bright orange. That might have come out okay. But you know, it probably wouldn't satisfy a scientist. It would satisfy most of the viewing public that's looking at something that's artistic and personal, because you'd have flesh tones, and the spacesuits, as I say, it wouldn't matter. So I suggested that to the guy at Westinghouse, and he said to me, Stanley LeBar said, "Yeah, we didn't have time to do that." We didn't have time to redesign it. We had time to build it. They only gave us a certain amount of months to do this. And he had another system for color that he told me not to document, but O'Neill wrote the article finally on it, so I guess I can talk about it. It was a portable thing that snapped on the front of the camera, on a monochrome camera. And I thought, well, how are they going to get the sync right? They went to below the watch, and there was an electromechanical movement that spun the disc, and they never used it. So.
Somewhere around here upstairs, I have a laser disc with two old two-strip Technicolor movies on it, two horror movies, The Thing That Ate Cleveland or something. And Jim's right. If you're looking at flesh tones, you're good. If you look at anything else in the background, you're not good.
It's not quite right. Yeah, there's a guy that has I think it's the Technicolor Museum website, and he has comparisons, and he has the comparison that I like the best is he goes to the movie The Robe, and he said, what if they shot this in two color? And, Richard Burton's robe would be the wrong color. And he said, it was blue in the movie and it comes out sort of a teal color. And he shows each character and he's modified the colors so they look like they would look in the blue colors. The thing is, if you didn't know about the robe, you wouldn't notice that. But you would notice things like backgrounds that look like they're just a little bit off. And that's the way Cinecolor was the competitor of Technicolor. And Cinecolor for a long time stayed with two-strip color. And they would print one color on one side of the film and the other on the other side. It sounds very clever, except that now the lens can't focus both at the same time equally well. So one of them's a little fuzzy. So that was one problem they had. The other thing is that they couldn't get black for the soundtrack, for the optical soundtrack. So it wasn't quite as good as Technicolor, but it was cheaper. And they went all the way through the 1950s. And Abbott and Costello made a couple of movies when they met Jack the Giant Killer, I think was one of them. And they had Son of Belle Starr was another movie made in 2-color with this process. I think it was Invaders from Mars they made with that process in the 50s. So there were reasons to use that. And you just, as I say, you look at it and you think, this is a nice color picture, but something's off. And I noticed that the ground colors are mostly gray and the sky colors are mostly cyan. And
yeah, that's true. The one interesting thing was that for additive color for the 2-color TV system, the orange and cyan or red, orange, and cyan have to be absolutely complementary so that you can make white. But in the case of the 2-color film, you can always make white by not having any red dye or any cyan dye. So that allows you to fudge the colors of the red and cyan one way or the other if it suits your purpose. And a lot of the examples that you see end up having blacks that aren't truly black, they're brownish. But again, that doesn't hurt most pictures because skin tones are orange or brownish, and the dirt can be brownish, and you won't think it's unusual.
mm-hmm. I think orange and teal are even better than red and cyan, but red and cyan would be colors that you could get out of a standard picture tube. So that was why they compromised it. The orange and teal are a 50-50 match. You're going to use half of one and half the other exactly. The other way, you use more teal, you use more cyan than red. But they've both worked for years, and there have been all sorts of color inventions, both in film and film, of course, preceded it, but a lot in film and video that have used both.
No, and if you're in a theater in 1932 and you see color, you don't care. It's a miracle.
Sure. Yeah, there were a whole bunch of Cinecolor cartoons. Cinecolor built on Kinemacolor before that, but it was a 2-color system. And they had all sorts of ways of doing that. They had spinning discs, they had alternate frames, they had split frames. Printing on both sides of the film. It was very clever, and they had to make it economical because the movie theaters, the movie producers only wanted to spend so much, and they were used to the black and white budget.
No, and it's interesting, this kind of early research in film then moves over to video, where you start playing around with red, blue, green. And now what filters do you use? What Ratten, what Roscoe? And that's where, Cliff was great to come up, with pure white, which is the object of the exercise.
I love hearing, though, the Baird supporters saying that he invented all this. And I'm thinking, no, there were, long before that, there were color experiments with film and also with video. So he didn't invent that. He was a great promoter, is what really was true.
The first full length 3-color Technicolor, I believe, was Becky Sharp. And the reviews are interesting because the reviewers thought it was great that they had a full range of color, including blue, but they complained that the production leaned too heavily on blue. It was like they were crowing about it, and they put blue in the scenes every chance they got.
Yeah, I don't think there's a complete copy of Becky Sharp that still exists anyplace. I've seen stills from it. It looked like it'd be fascinating to watch. Somebody's got a website that's got some of the Turner color experiments that go back to 1904. And you can watch those on YouTube.
Well, the color film was actually quite early, and one of the first color films that was actually successful was an additive system in which they took a black and white negative, panchromatic, of course, and dyed grains of starch, red, green, and blue, and put that on the surface of the film, took the exposure, developed the thing as black and white, and of course you had the filters that were still there, and you looked through it when it was like an Ektachrome. It was a color transparency, and those things still exist. Not only the originals exist, but you can actually there's somebody that's manufacturing them now as a hobbyist sort of thing. And actually the color is really quite good. Of course, the resolution is awful.
Yeah. I know the French guy, Georges Méliès, that did Magic and the Moon, one of the first Moon dramas. That was partly hand-colored. And I don't think I've ever seen the hand-colored one, but it was probably pretty good. And of course, you had Land's experiments in the 30s with polarized film, the first polarized film. And Baird picked that up and claimed that he invented it and even photocopied the pictures from Land's patent and put them on his own patent in the 1940s.
Now, this has been a fun discussion. It's great to keep this part of the hobby alive, and we got a few fans around here and a few experts, and let's keep it up.
Yeah, color.
You were talking about what sets past the color signal all the way through, so you can use them with the color tell. And that reminded me of when I was a teenager, we had a 21-inch Admiral console. And when the color broadcast started, I read about it and read about the color subcarrier and so forth. And I could see on the chroma dots on that black and white set. And I was always looking, there's color in that signal. I wonder what the color actually is.
No, that's the test for any set you might want to use. If you suddenly inherit or buy a color tell, is if you can see the color dot subcarrier on the screen of the set, tune it. If you can see those dots, that set's good. Done.
Yeah, that was another thing I wanted to bring up. I remembered when I was talking about SpecTrack, you didn't have to clip all those wires like you did with ColorTel, they would send you a set of CRT adapters, like the ones that come with your CRT test kits. You know, with
Oh,
Rejuven.
they picked it off right at the tube.
Yes, they just plugged it right into the back of the tube. I told Cliff about that when I read about it, and he said, "Oh, that's so clever." You know, of course, back then there weren't that many different types of picture tubes, so they could do that. They could say, "Okay, here's half a dozen adapters, and you're all set." So you take off the back of the set, and you plug a couple things in, make some holes for the wires to come out, and you're done.
I did that. Can you people hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I did that. My poor CT100. Oh, let me get it there. That's my CTC 100 behind me. Lost its picture tube. It arced, and it was a very loud arc, and it completely vaporized the red gun. So what I did was build a little box. I could find it here, but I'm not going to do it. A little box that simply, I unsoldered the wires from the three places where the wires go to the CRT. I unplugged the CRT. And so I have the three wires loose, and I just run them into a little box that had 3 FETs followed by 3 50 ohm capable bipolar transistors to drive 50 ohms, and set on top an expensive 15-inch Sony color monitor, semi-pro, and produces a beautiful, I mean, the picture was just astoundingly good. Actually, the CRT pictures are pretty good by themselves, but this one was a little bit better. And of course, it had perfect DC restoration, because no matter even without DC restoration, which the CT100 has, the monitor itself did the thing, and the picture was just astounding how good it was, until I got a really good replacement 1522, of course, and it worked real well, and it's easy to do. I mean, you just do what you just said. You disconnect those 3 wires, clip on alligator clips, and you've got yourself a color picture. And
your circuit must have been direct coupled then, your transistor circuit.
It was direct coupled to what would have been the grids of the 15 GP22, but it didn't matter because of the way the DC restoration worked in standard monitors. I actually put capacitors in to see what would happen, and it still was perfect picture.
Okay, so the DC restoration was already in the monitor, and then that took care of it. And so you could use a simpler circuit, a simpler to build circuit with capacitor coupling, and it would still work. That's neat.
But I did use DC coupling.
Yeah, it'd be neat to see your circuit if you ever want to put it up on one.
It's on it's in an article on Video Karma. You can look it up. It's all there. And it requires a trick, of course, to reduce the voltage level.
Sure.
And so what I did was feed the signal from each one through a 10 megohm resistor into a 1 megohm resistor to ground that went from the gate of the FET to ground. And then to get the frequency response right, I put a 3 to 10 picofarad a variable capacitor in parallel with each of the 10 megohm resistors, and I just adjusted that to get, well, no, there was also a 15 or 20 picofarad or something capacitor across the FET's base, not base,
gate
source, gate to source, and you balance those. It's just like a scope probe. You turn the adjustment of the variable capacitor. It's like a scope probe, and it gets a perfect. It goes down to DC. Worked great.
Sounds good.
Just to throw in another little sidelight here, about 4 or 5 years ago, I picked up a little 4.5-inch or so JVC field sequential color monitor. It's a black and white tube inside there, and it's a variation of some Tektronix scope displays. But in front of the black and white, very high voltage CRT is an LCD filter, which is, a red, a blue, and a green layer. Essentially, it's 1 pixel in front of the display. The set sees the color coming in, interprets it, and the color LCD filter flickers red, blue, green in full screen in front of the RGB image behind it on a black and white TV. And it is spectacular. I think it was invented for field engineers, news people to use out in bright sunlight where they had this bright CRT coming at them, and then they could see color. There's no color dots. There's no nothing. It's just one of the best looking color things I've ever seen. It's actually got a built-in, back then, NTSC tuner. It's wonderful. And I could bring it down here next time, and I hold it up, it's going to look terrible. But it's out there.
It's probably going at 180 frames a second to get the 3. But
I don't know what the conversion is, but I believe what's his name, E-Type Marshall has a page on his Visions 4 thing about this thing. You can look it up there.
The great thing about it, and people have said this before, that preferred the CBS system, it never goes into misconvergence. It never needs to be demagnetized.
Wait a minute. The grain research monitor at ETF showed misconvergence.
How could it do it? It's only one
CRT. Can you guess why? Well, there's 2 possible reasons.
There's something wrong.
One is the size at high voltage is not sufficiently regulated. That was not the problem. The other problem is 60 cycle hum in the sweep.
Oh.
So if the sweep moves from one field to the next, you get a misconvergence that ripples up through the picture.
That's fascinating.
And it's also one of the things that was a possible detriment in the CBS system that apparently never got widely criticized, although somebody who actually designed TV sets would realize this is an issue. And I often wonder if those Emerald sets that were said to be convertible to a color had solid enough power supplies to actually do a decent job of it or not.
Well, that's a good point, because that was one reason they chose the 60 hertz field rate in the first place.
Yep.
Well, I have a comment to make about hum in the picture. I've had a lot of problems with hum in the picture of my TRK-12 and the Marconi 702. That's a Marconi 702. It's not a picture on it. You're just looking at the reflection of your show here. I've had a lot of trouble, and this is a question for you, you people to make a suggestion for the problem. The problem with the TRK-12 was that the power transformer for the radio was too close to the picture tube, and I fixed that by getting, well, I had one in my lab, in my chem lab, a mu metal shield for a photomultiplier tube, and it just stuck that up on the base of the CRT, and that fixed the problem. That was easy, but you can't do that to the Marconi 702, and the problem is a lot worse because you got a picture that's running, a television set with the picture that's running at 50 hertz, and the hum is running at 60 hertz, so it flickers at 10 hertz, and it's actually quite a problem. And you can't get a mu metal shield on it, a round shield, because the tube socket is a very strange thing. It's like square. It's about that big square. It has like 4 pins on one side sticking out on a flat thing, and 4 pins on the other side.
Can I ask a question? Are you sure it's due to magnetic effects and not power supply hum?
Well, the wiggle in the picture, is definitely due to magnetic effects.
Okay.
Because if I take one of these big round degausser coils and hold it about 3 feet or 4 or 5 feet from the TV at just the right angle, the problem goes away. In other words, you can buck out the magnetic field, and that fixes the problem. So it's
have you tried mounting the transformer and rotating it?
I haven't tried doing anything to that set. It's too valuable. The picture tube is too valuable. It came, quote, restored, unquote. It wasn't really restored. It was repaired by a near incompetent in England, but it works great. By the near incompetent, or I don't know what you call it, lethargic or something, he soldered wires to the bases of some of the tubes because the old British sockets were so awful that they couldn't be fixed. You'd had to get new sockets, and he didn't want to do it. The other thing is, with that set, to fix the sound, you have to remove everything else, including the picture tube first. Yeah, so it had a bad sound. So I was able to find out what was wrong with it and fix it while it was in situ. You can remove the sides and work on the rest of all the video. They're accessible because the sides come off. But it has another problem, which is an interesting one with magnetic. I think it's magnetic. The focus is not uniform over the picture. It's okay, but it's not really good. And I never figured out what was doing it. And the humbucking from at 60 hertz doesn't fix it. So I'm thinking maybe there's a shield, an iron shield. It's not mu metal, it's iron, around the picture tube, square thing. That could be magnetized, but I tried degaussing it several times and it didn't work. So it has this strange thing that one of the corners is out of focus. Of course, given how that picture tube is made, it's really weird because, normal picture tubes have a round cathode and then have a round annulus. that's open, that's the grid. It doesn't have grid wires. This thing has grid wires. And the reason it has grid wires is that it doesn't have a video amplifier. It just takes the output of the, it's a TRF tuner. It's not a superhead. It runs at 45 megahertz. It's a amplifier chain, just like exactly like the IF chain of a standard modern tubized, NTSC set, except it's at the RF frequency. Takes the output of that into a rather powerful pentode, and it diode demodulates that, and the diode demodulated signal goes directly to the grid. It's only 15 volts. It's a weird system, but it works just fine.
Is that magnetic deflection?
Yeah, it's perfectly ordinary magnetic deflection.
Okay, but what's the high voltage?
5 kilovolts.
Okay, so it's really a low voltage, and it's kind of just sitting there waiting for anything to disturb it.
Well, it's sitting where waiting for somebody to touch the exposed terminals of the high voltage filter capacitors, which are actually hidden quite a ways back. You can't really get to them. But the thing works.
That's the big king. Well, Dave Abramson, you were going to ask me a question, and my computer's running out of power. I'm 12% right now, so I won't be here too much longer.
Unmute. There I am. All right. No, my question is, my Colortel drive belt for the motor to the wheel was sent to me by Danny Gustafson many years ago. It turns out the belt is actually a hydraulic O-ring sleeve. It's very soft. I'm looking to find a true hard belt, drive belt in that same dimension. And I don't have the dimensions handy, but as I remember Cliff saying, it's roughly, 6 inches by 3/8 or something like that. I just am looking for a little help to find a real hard rubber drive belt, not a silicone O-ring or, some hydraulic back end loader.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I don't know where to look. I go to Granger and try and figure out something, but I don't know where to go. And in my case, my wheel comes up to just short of sync speed, just short, like so close. And then it kind of falls back a bit. So I want to change this belt and see where I go from there. The wheel amplifier does have a 6 SN7, I think, is the controller for that power. But I got to change out this belt somehow.
I think I could look for you to see if there's anything on eBay or Aladdin.
Or if there's a spec somewhere in a manual as to what this belt is really supposed to be.
Okay, I'll see if I don't know if I have that spec actually, but I will look, and I probably can find a part number.
Yeah, thank you. And in my case, the other thing inside of mine, the hub and the contacts, the contact springs have gone away. So I don't know that I can rebuild that, but the Darrell Hawk adapter seems to work, which doesn't need those contacts. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay there. And actually, that picture looks better. So let's see where we go.
Okay, I will see if there's anything more I can find on that. Who knows? Sometimes we get lucky. And of course, some of these belts are more stretchable than others too, which will also play into the picture.
Yeah. And apparently, this thing really wants a hard drive belt, not some flexy silicone thing to operate properly. It doesn't like that elasticity in a silicone belt.
Okay. Not stretchy.
Not stretchy. Yeah, there's actually a hardness number that can be applied to belts, which I don't know that spec, but the higher the better.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I'll be any luckier than you are, but it's worth looking, I guess. I'll check.
Thank you much. That's why we do this thing on Sunday nights or Saturday nights.
I don't know if I have a direct email for you.
I'll go to your website and drop it to you.
Good deal. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm running out of power.
Yeah, and I'm running out of gas and good sign off.
Good night.
All right, kids, I'm out of here. And the rest of you continue on, have fun. I'll see you next month.
Is there anybody still there?
I'm still here, but about to go.
See you next month.
Good night.
Yep. Happy Halloween.